So, Frank Sweeney, you have done just about everything. What is the one thing that connects all of the different roles, companies, and industries you've worked in?
Technology does not drive humanity. It's a tool for humanity to get better. And so that's really exciting to me in my field. And I think that's the commonality in over the years that I didn't really know until AI came about on what technology actually means for all of us.
All that and more on Transformers. Welcome to Transformers, a podcast where I get the opportunity to talk to some of the brightest minds out there who are working on the hardest problems, transformations, and other challenges. I'm Ann Fanai, CIO and Vice President of Business Platform Transformation at IBM. This is Transformers, a Think podcast. Frank Sweeney, thank you so much for joining the show. Appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
You are currently CIO at the Arizona Department of Child Safety, but you came to this through a very, very interesting, winding, twisting path. And I got to be honest, no disrespect to previous guests here. I don't think, and I'm actually going to look down at my notes, I don't think we've ever had someone that's gone from consulting to a large tech company to working for an MLB team to private equity to a startup then to a public government oriented entity. I am just absolutely fascinated with the history and what brought you to this. And I would love for you to kind of share what took you on this journey and how you ended up in such different spots. And then ultimately you've spent a good chunk of time in public. What's your passion? What's drawing you in these directions?
I'm glad you asked that. I answer that quite often in so many different ways, but the good story is that about 32 years ago, I kind of stumbled into IT. And I always laugh about it because I always think it's like Forrest Gump of IT. Because I started off, I wanted to be a history teacher. And so I got a double major in history and political science. And my wife was going to be a math teacher. And so we had it all planned out. And then my first job out of college was on a political campaign. And this person, that was in IT, and he said, hey, there's a .com company that I want to start out in Chandler, Arizona. And this is early 90s. And yes, there was .coms in early 90s. I'm not that old, but and the interesting story behind that is my mom moved out there a year earlier. So I had some family out there, and I started my consulting a little bit as a Arthur Anderson, I guess now they call it Accenture. And the person said, well, if you ever get out to Arizona, give me a call. And so I happened to be out in Arizona to see my mom, gave the person a call, and the rest is history. I spent 32 years, not in history. I spent 32 years in IT, and I had a wonderful journey in the private sector and made a lot of money. I'm not afraid of saying that, and lost a lot of money. Did some mistakes along the way. And I always admired my wife. Of course, I knew her since I was in college, and she spent a lot of time in the public sector. And every time she saw me struggling in the private sector, she looked at me and she couldn't understand why I was so unhappy, even though I was fulfilling all the monetary dreams I had of being in the private sector. And I always kind of looked at her and said, wow, you're so content. You're so joyful all the time. Why are you so joyful? And I wanted to feel that way. I wanted to feel that there was something more than just money that I was going after and all the things that I was doing in my career. And so I kind of got jealous. And one day, I answered an ad, and the rest is history. I didn't look back. I find it very similar. I spent my life serving people in a different way. I served in the private sector with .com companies as due diligence and mergers. And I spent, serving different clients as a consultant. So I had it always a part of me. I just never did it for public. And so when that happened to me, it was one of those things that was like a revelation. Why didn't I do this earlier? Why didn't I get into the public service earlier? Because it's so rewarding, and it's something that you can't put on paper. It's just you have to experience. And so Now my wife and I are both in public service, and we are
Mhm.
experiencing the joy together. And now I understand why she smiles in the morning when she looks at me. So
No, no, I mean, that's just I mean, it's so incredible because I know personally I feel very mission driven by things. I look for some mission, some piece of every job that, keeps you getting out of bed in the morning, right? Because, as you said, at some point it's it's not the almighty dollar, if you will. You've got to find some joy. And the other anecdote I've given is I say I don't quite know how I got to where I am in my career, but now that I'm here, I know what I want the next 10 years to be, right? And
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
So no, I that's amazing. And and what's really interesting too, the CIO role is a little bit different too, especially when you're dealing with, family services, children's services, right? Technology is not necessarily the forefront. It's really the human interaction. And I want to kind of maybe explore two forks down that road. So like fork one, you have you made a statement to me earlier about that you think the three roles a CIO plays. And how that interacts with the human element. So stick to the technology side first. Tell me about your big three.
Well, really, a CIO's job is to do three basic things. Of course, I say basic tongue in cheek because they're very difficult things. But when you say them, you'd say, "Oh, of course, that's what they do," and anybody can really do that. The number one thing a CIO does is managing the budget, and that's specifically important in the public sector because you're dealing with legislature, and so that's a big thing. You have to make sure everything that you're doing is a fiscal steward of the public money, but also that you have to make sure that it's tied to the purpose and the mission of the agency. So that's a very big thing, and it has to do with a lot of politics. Most of my job is political in a sense because you have to convince other people that what you're doing is the right thing, first of all, in a technological standpoint, but also that it's tied to an overall good that we need in society and also serving the public in the state of Arizona. The second biggest thing that a CIO does is they manage risk. So there's everything that I make, every decision I make has a certain amount of risk tied to it. And so that also has some uh, correlation to political stuff because everything I convince someone to do when they do it, I better I
Yeah.
better know what I'm talking about and I better manage that risk for not only them, but for me and the purpose of the agency. And the third biggest thing that a CIO does is managing relationships. And of course, IBM is a huge relationship for us, but it's also all the relationships up and down. You have to above you, the senior leadership relationships, the relationships with other agencies that you integrate with, and also the relationships in the public as well as the private sector. So those are three big things that CIOs do on a daily basis. All the other things are kind of task orientated, but those three things need to be done and need to be done well.
Yeah. No, and I like you call out the commonality of like you're always campaigning, like each of those. And so it's like even though they're very very tactile or not tactile, that's not the right word. They're very specific and finite, like budget, risk, like things that are very quantifiable. There's a people element to all of those, right? And that's in a company for me like IBM, it's kind of convincing folks to come maybe try new technology or, hey, you've got this app, but SAP or Salesforce does this now, like to try to get folks to behaviorally change move, but yours is actually a different kind of campaigning, right? It's really again, it's back to the public being stewards of the money that was spent, and that's got to have some definite swings and challenges to it.
All big time, yes.
What makes your role pretty interesting too is we're all running towards AI in the tech sector, right? And I like for me, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm using like Code Assistant here to do this. I'm, doing this over like I'm working this with Salesforce for Agentforce. I'm working this with SAP, and it's about making the tech move faster. But your approach to AI is very different because, you know, it's about really making time for your field folks, your caregivers in the field to meet with families. So you're taking a very different approach to what type of AI would be pragmatic.
Right. I look at AI as a tool, and as well as all technology. I never really looked at technology my whole career as a solution. It is a tool that can be used for a solution by good people. And also, if they support a mission and a purpose, the tool is really useful. But a tool also can be very negative if it's not purpose driven. And so when I look at AI, and I use the technology for what we're doing and support the mission, I always look at a scenario that comes up quite often. How much time do the folks in the field have to do their job? And I'm not talking about the task associated with administrative work that they have to do, right? You have to do certain things on time for the courts, and you have to do certain things on time for lawyers and on whatnot. And you also have to do some time, use time sparingly for different things that are not associated with the core. And the core of our existence is to care for families and protect kids, right? And so everything that deviates from that has a really negative outcome for anything that's happening within that within their job. So my job is to look at things that are very manually orientated, the things that they shouldn't spend a lot of time on, and try to change that. So if we took an example of, and this is purely an example, it's fictitious, but let's say an 8-hour day happens, and a caregiver spends 7 of those hours on administrative task and only 1 hour on family. But what if we could use tools to flip that, and they spend 8 hours talking, communicating, embracing, and trying to care for families and their kids? Guess what? The outcome is the exact opposite. And so that's where I take the approach of, let's make sure that we're using tools to aid in that support of them doing what they do best, and that's caring for people.
Yeah, no, and it's got to be, just thinking about the caregivers you work at. This is a heavy, heavy job of what they do in the field. Like it is, and it's terrible. And I can, something that might seem to me in a corporate setting very minuscule, like, oh, just do this little piece of paperwork. We've got a compliance activity. It's like those types of activities, there's already a huge emotional toll.
Big time.
And just the more you can remove that, I mean, it has to be priority one. And with that being said, obviously you also have a lot of regulatory compliance things like, HIPAA, I'm sure is a huge thing when you get into some of the, medical aspects of this. Like, how do you balance the tooling you give your folks in the field that can give them that time to spend with the families against, potential, maybe even like risks with new technology coming in, even if it might save them that extra hour, but it's brand new and has a risk. How do you really go evaluate and assess that?
Well, there's always a risk and reward scenario in anything that we do. We have a really good approach to that. We build prototypes with ideas that people come up with either in the field or senior management. And then when we go through the whole process of prototyping, at some point in the prototyping, when we get to a point where we feel that we can be 90 to 95% accurate in whatever that is in AI, we also have a committee that goes through and says, okay, now we have it ready for maybe human in the loop, right? We have a production ready potential solution for something that we're looking at. We look at it in a different way then. We look at it and say, if we do this, what are all the potential ways it could go backwards on us or could be negatively impacting us in any way? And at the end of that whole cycle, we either put it in production or we don't, but it's never wasted because in AI, when you're building code, especially when you're doing open source stuff, you're looking at stuff and you're saying, what can we use from this experience, whether the learning of what we're doing, the actual process of doing the AI prototyping, or the code itself, and saying, can we reuse this for something else that maybe is a little bit less impactful or potential riskier or less risk? So we never really go away from looking at stuff critically at the end of it, but we do sometimes sidetrack things that maybe is the risk and reward is not there for us.
And I got to imagine for your team as well, that creates, they understand that risk reward, but it also still gives them an opportunity to innovate, stay on the leading edge. Because I would imagine, any nerd like either, well, I guess you're a history nerd, now a tech nerd, so you're a double nerd. I'm just a tech nerd. But it's like, there's always that, search for knowledge, that like hunger to learn more. And that, I got to imagine that's hard if everything is like, okay, that's too risky, too risky. So it's really interesting. I love the way you found a balance for your team in that as well.
Right. And we've pivoted a lot of things. We've had things that we've had great solutions that we're just not ready yet for. whether it be a policy or a law or something like that, but we taking specific things out of that code and use it for something like redacting information from a document. So it wasn't a waste. And the other thing that people get from it, and I think this is really a very good thing about how we approach things, is that they get the learning experience of that design and human-centered design. How we approach software or any solution, it has to be human-centered and it has to be human in the loop.
Yeah, and to keep playing that thread about humans, right? You're also what you do with with the department as a whole does, right? It is, I mean, you're in a position uniquely where I don't know if it's uniquely, but I think a lot more rare right now. AI cannot replace humans, right? Like what AI does today, or even maybe even a few years out in the future. I mean, because I do believe it's kind of it's just increasing. Like it's just like going up like a. It's just increasing crazy. We can't really even predict 2, 3, 4 years. But I don't know what you do, like sitting down with providing the tech to support sitting down with a family and children, like an AI doesn't replace that. We're not going to be sending a robot in the next few years. And when we met before, you had mentioned to me like this AI versus your gut, and I'd love you to share that piece.
Well, the biggest fallacy when I talk to people that don't want AI or they are diabolically opposed to anything that has to do with AI is they have to understand what AI can do. AI is not a human being. And when I say this is here's the distinction that everybody has to know. Number one, when a human makes mistakes, they learn from errors, right? So a human goes through and they go and do something. And let's say they do something stupid and they learn from their mistake from that. When they do the same thing over again, the human might actually make the same choice again, or they might make something that's totally irrational. Another thing that was never even a variable that was never even presented the first time for this very same situation. When a machine learns from everything that is given to them from a human. Now, a human can't think of all the different ways, logical and illogical, to give a machine. So the human mind is vastly more complicated than AI. It will never replace humans because humans make irrational decisions on the very same thing that they made the wrong decision the first time. So you need human in the loop because there's a portion of humans that go on gut instinct. They don't go on rational or irrational. They go on a feeling. A machine can't feel. And there's no way of uploading that to a machine to make them learn about the feeling. So until they imprint a card or, or something on a chip of our brains exactly the way they are now, AI will never, ever replace a human. We always have to be the people that upload the information to an AI model.
Yeah, and oddly enough, I'm a huge Isaac Asimov fan,
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's and I was actually just rereading one of the short stories. I just finished it last night called Mirror Mirror, and actually, to be honest, that is actually one of the that's the turning point of the story. Is they had two robots telling exact mirror images just with names swapped of the story, and they brought in a human detective because they couldn't figure out who was telling the truth or not, and it was the human who said, "Well, I had my gut," said, "Well, how did you decide that?" "Well, my gut made me realize that." Even though they were doing the same thing, this is the underlying rationale for it. So it's like, I guess even in the even 1950s and 60s when Asimov was writing it, we were thinking of these things. That's
Right.
amazing. One of the other things that you are bound quite a bit by is, data privacy, security, and I have to imagine there's a really interesting mix of that because if you're in the field with, say, a tablet or a phone, and you have to kind of protect that data in that situation, which is very different than more traditional, like I'm protecting it in a data center or in a cloud, et cetera. How do you, even beyond AI, very much down to the basics? How do you enable your field folks in the field to feel like they're dealing with a secure product that they can really protect their clients' privacy with everything they're using in the field?
Well, I think we do a really good job of communicating to everybody in the agency that it's not IT's responsibility to preserve and safekeep all the information, like personal information or HIPAA information. We have a really good CISO that communicates to everyone in the agency that it's their responsibility as well as ours to make sure that everything that we touch, whether it be a software, a piece of data, or a report, has to have safeguards to make sure the people that actually are reading it are the ones that need to read it for obviously the purpose of supporting the mission. So I think we do a real good job at that. And I don't think that's a technical thing, and it has to do with a culture. We made a culture of security in our agency so far.
And is part of that too, I mean, it's educating the public as well. So maybe this ties back a little bit to your big three to start with, like showing that the money is spent responsibly. There's also an education to the public as
Absolutely.
well with the data.
The other thing too is making sure people understand that, data is the king of anything that people are trying to come after us with. In other words, bad people don't say, "Hey, I want to break in some place just to break into it." Although that is, something that hackers do. But for the most part, they're after data and what they can do with data. Data is very powerful. And so we know that, and obviously we try to protect as much as we can.
Yeah, no, you had mentioned the concept of a tabletop exercise as well. So you guys are going through those really, which again, it's very interesting to me, like a tabletop exercise at a tech company versus I was at a retail company. Like it's probably got a really different. Every one of those tabletops has a different set of variables depending on
Right.
the industry you're in.
And I think the tabletop exercises are really good too because we try to tie in all the different agencies that we need to talk with as far as Arizona Department of Homeland Security, Department of Administration, and whatnot. So all the people that are involved in that need to be involved in any notification of an incident are involved in those tabletops.
Back to a comment I made earlier, right? That your industry is burnout. Like it's a passion job. Like you said, you have purpose. Every day you wake up, you have that joy. You're doing something better, to better people, wellness, welfare, society. But it's a high burnout. Like there is an emotional toll on the folks who do this work in the field. And what are your thoughts on, we talk about AI at work, but like what about is there an impact AI can have or other emerging technology have for your caregivers in the field that can help with maybe some of that burnout, some of those challenges that they face just having to process all they have to process with the job they have?
I think so. I think there's a hidden, just like in sales, there's always a hidden objection, right? So when we see high turnover, and obviously our field's high turnover, I don't think people are saying exactly what they mean when they're going out the door. I think that there is a portion of what we do as far as a caregiver that they don't really have enough time to decompress. And we kind of exacerbate that because we don't give them tools so they can decompress. In other words, I think AI, by eliminating a lot of the manual tasks associated with just pure administration, may give enough time for the folks in the field to decompress between very, very complex and serious moments that they experience in the field. And so I'm hoping that AI can do that from a technological standpoint.
Yeah, and I was actually once asked on a panel that I did about what do I think AI is going to give to the workforce from a tech company perspective. And at the risk of being a little flippant about this, it's like I actually think this is the world's just going to keep changing on the tech side. You got to keep up, keep up, keep up. My hope is that AI and emerging technology is actually helping people with their personal lives and like. I live and die by my Aura ring. Like, did it tell me like what kind of night of sleep? I can tell, like, I can look at the end of the day and see where I got stressed out, correlate that to times and meetings and events I was in. And it's like I feel like those moments are really what I hope we'll do is like kind of just understand ourselves. And my hope would be, I think for all of the folks you work with that do those, incredibly emotionally challenging jobs would get, have that opportunity similar. So,
Yeah, me too.
yeah. So, all right. Now, wrapping here, you have done it all. Like it'd be a challenge. Again, you're the first person I think I've met in my entire career who has gone through so many different types of jobs. And I would love, like, what are your words of wisdom for someone either like aspiring to the seat you're in, aspiring to some of the jobs you've had in the past? Like, what would you advise them as they're thinking about the different types of jobs and where they want to go with their career?
I would say wake up every day without a regret. I know that's kind of a cliche. I think some people have written books about purpose-driven life. It really is that easy, though, in a sense. It's easy in the sense of saying it, right? Because obviously there's different factors in your life that you have to, you have to provide for your family a certain way, and you have to do things, you have to raise your kids and whatnot. But if you can find a purpose in your life, that you can wake up every single day and it's not a task, it's not a chore, it's just getting up and doing what you love, and someone will pay you for that, I think that's the greatest gift you can give anybody, including your spouse, the people that you work for, the people you work with, the public, because if you're in public service like me, there's not a day that goes by I don't think about, wow, I really love what I do. And I want to give so much as I can and not feel any regret at all. If you could do that, I think that would be a very successful life.
Very amazing. And just, thank you for all that you do helping the children and families in the state of Arizona. And sounds like you actually, you also actually have a very, very wonderful spouse who, I know we
I
left this
do.
off at the beginning, was, tutored you through college, but you guys have, it sounds like you've like really built a wonderful life together and so supportive. And, with that, thank you again. Like truly, thank you for taking time out of your day today. I really loved having you on the podcast.
Thank you for asking me, and I had a great time.
And thank you for joining us today on Transformers. We hope to have you back in a couple weeks.